English Language Center at the Colorado State University. He is a professor with many years of experience. He has been internationally in different programs, and he right now is running the Language Center there at Denver University. So team, it is a pleasure for us to have you this morning with us, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here with all of you today on, well, here in the States, it's Father's Day. So I'm sure it's similar to many of you. So if there are any fathers out there, happy Father's Day. I hope you have a wonderful day, despite, many of us not able to go out or anything, but I hope you're still able to enjoy it. So, there, like was mentioned, there's this sort of new normal of being online. And there's no exception, where I am. I think throughout the world, everyone's having to adapt to going online. I know probably for many of you, this is the same for me and my little institution, that we were looking into going online, in a year, possibly. We were exploring these possibilities. I had created an online class, which I will discuss earlier, but that was mainly for other purposes and other reasons. But now, we are developing a new curriculum online, and there's a lot of challenges and obstacles and things to consider. This past term, we did go fully online, but we had to do it in 2 weeks. So I'll talk a little bit about what we did then. And then I'll talk about, if you are looking into course development, online course development, some suggestions, some obstacles to consider. As well, if you're not developing courses, I think a lot of what you can get out of this presentation will be helpful for teaching online as well. So let's get started. I need to share my screen here.
Give me a sec. Permission for sharing the screen. Is set already? Give me a sec. There, team, you already have permission.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So today, what am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about planning type of online courses. There are two kinds that specifically I'll focus on. The challenges that you might face in developing as well as teaching these courses, some factors to consider, and my experiences are going to be thrown in throughout. And then, also throughout, I'll have some questions for you to consider. So in the chat box or anything like that, if you want to, please just, throw something in there for some of the answers or for some of these questions that I posed to you. Some of the questions are just fairly simple. It just require a yes or a no or a simple answer. So I'm going to start off here with a couple questions actually. So the first one, who has taken an online course before? So this could be as a student more than anything else, because I think it's important to, if you are going to teach online, it's important to kind of know what it's like as a student as well. And then what is your impression of the course? So, you can say bad, good, frustrating, excellent, anything you really want to say at this point.
Well, if you ask me, I had taken some courses. I have taken some courses online, and I must say that the first time I took one, it was quite a challenge for me. It was the first time I wouldn't know how to rate it at the beginning, but then I had the opportunity to take others, and then I was able to rate them. And of course, the latest ones were better than the first one.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple other questions to consider here I have. 1 second. So have you taught an online course, and then what was challenging for you? So yeah, what was challenging? What did you think was difficult here?
Well, in my case, someone's typing there, but the answer is not coming yet. But in my case, I've been teaching online for over 2 years. And it's way different from the regular teaching, and it was kind of difficult to adapt, even though I was used to use different online tools and resources in my regular basic lesson. But now I just cannot picture myself not teaching an online course. I think it's easier, like the way to approach the student. It is also smoother, the way you can plan and use different activities, and you have tons of activities and resources that you can just use in order to foster, I mean, to practice in our case, the language skills with students.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much on that. Yeah. Are there going to be anything coming through of the chat that I can see here, or is it going to be on your end?
I think it's gonna be in our end. Yes, it's gonna be in our end. But as soon as we get something, we will let you know, of course.
Okay, so it's fine. Like I said, I'm just going to kind of, if you don't answer anything, that's fine. Also, these are just questions really to think about also. So we can just kind of move on here.
Yeah, okay.
So if you're thinking about preparing and planning a course, first and foremost, it's really important to really plan it out. And this stage, really is important. You know, I know a lot of us, you know, were forced to go online, you know, in 2 weeks very quickly. And I know that's a little bit different than if maybe you're now looking into sort of creating a whole online curriculum. But if you are, and especially if you have time, you know, you have a couple months, this is really a stage I wouldn't just pass over. And I know it's easy for a lot of us to do so. But again, if teaching online is new to you, this is something you really would need to think about first. There's a lot of different models out there to use. This is called design thinking. It's a model that I think is useful and successful. It doesn't have to be one necessarily that you have to use. The reason why I think this is a fairly good model to use when planning out is it kind of adds that sort of, if you see up there, that empathy piece to it. So it says there's sort of bias towards action. And that's the one quote I decided just to put up here for you to see that says, don't be fearful to make choices and take action, even especially when you face indecision. So, you know, it might be, you know, going online, you might say, well, it's not really for me. That's not for my students. It's going to be too complicated. It's going to be too hard. So, you know, those are the kind of thoughts I think that we kind of need to remove a little bit. We can't be biased towards that action. We need to go out and really try. You know, I think with this new normal that everyone's talking about with the pandemic and everything, we are forced to do this, but you're probably going to see serious changes going forward. You're going to see a lot more learning online as we slowly come back from this pandemic. And you know, there are some challenges, but there are some really good things about this also. So that empathy piece, like I mentioned, I'll really talk about that with the example that I created. It's thinking about your students. What do they need? What do they want? I mean, really getting into the mind and the feelings of your students. So it might require, you know, a little market research to get out there and ask them all these questions about what they know about online learning. What do they enjoy the most? Once you kind of gather and you start getting this information, you know, you can start we get to that next stage, which is kind of define, right? Kind of define, you know, what that meaning is for that students and what is this class going to give these students? You know, and then you of course, like a lot of brainstorming sessions, then you start thinking of ideas and then you create your prototype and then you test it, of course, right? So a few other things to consider in this model, I have collaborating across boundaries. That really means, you know, reaching out, you know, if you, whether it's just the colleagues within your department, your institution, or possibly other institutions, or maybe you know, other departments if you're at a university, for example. So looking at ways to collaborate, because you might have specialists within your institution that have a lot to offer. Even, you know, my knowledge is limited, and I know when I work with other colleagues, they always bring new things to the table, and I'm like, wow, I didn't think of that. The human values piece, again, I won't get too much into that because, again, that kind of falls with the empathy. Again, be mindful of the process. Really just say if it takes, you know, a month or 2 months, that's fine. Just make sure that you're doing it correctly. You know, and then the prototype, yeah, we all know you have to kind of start and prototype and test it. But that last one, show, don't tell, and I'll talk about that in my example also, you know, which is really big in language learning. In online, it's possible to do this. What I mean by that, you're not just sort of telling, you know, people what your ideas are. You know, it's kind of like show and tell, right? You're making them feel it. You're showing it in a way that they're experiencing this. So I'm going to show you a couple students that I encountered in the last couple of years. I don't remember exactly when I heard these stories, but these really will show you some good examples of why I wanted to create this online course from our department, because I had these kind of conversations. So one story here from a student from Managua. The obstacle the student, I posed questions like, what is your obstacle to coming to the US to study English, right? And the student says, and this is verbatim, this is just directly taken from what the student said. Because I want to achieve this dream, I am looking for opportunity to study abroad, but the situation that is happening in my country affects me in an emotional, academic, and economic aspect. It's very hard. A very hard situation is happening in my country because we have around 7 months that the government is killing students because to have critical thinking or to have our own flag is a crime. We cannot express our feelings or thoughts. Very powerful stuff. Again, we're not getting into any politics of country or anything here. I just wanted, this is just from a student expressing why they want to come to the US to achieve their dreams. The next story here, this is a woman from Rwanda. So you can see that this is from all over the world. People have similar obstacles. She says, in our culture, living as a big family is what makes us come together and be strong as one. Great, I love that quote. Now the obstacle here, growing up in a poor family was so difficult that I never had access to many things in life. Such as, or has, the opportunity to study online. And even when I was attending school, I was always sent out of school due to non-payment of my school fee. So getting the opportunity to study online has made a lot of impact in my life. Getting the money to pay for my school fee and accommodation when studying abroad is my biggest challenge. So again, two different countries, two cultures, very distant from each other, but have obstacles of coming to the US and studying. So a couple more questions to think about here. I have, based on these stories, what obstacles do they have in common to studying in the US? What are these obstacles? So the first one, was maybe political in a way, maybe there was some economical as well. And then in the other one, you also saw the same thing, sort of economics, right? And I agree, it's very expensive to study and come to the US. And it's a very long and difficult process for many. And then besides these obstacles, what do you think they had in common? So even though they were, far, away from each other, one in Africa and one in Central America here, what did they have in common? And you probably saw that the passion for education, even though there was these obstacles, they still said to myself, even though I'm living in a difficult situation and, there are many obstacles for me to get over, I have this passion and I need to learn. So these are just two stories of many that I read in the past 2 years. Well, I'd say 3 years ago before I created this online course. So a little context, how did I meet these students? So, we at our institution offered a scholarship for a student to come study 1 term with us. And the scholarship, when it was offered, it was a kind of a bit of a, like a competition where students would send in essays. And a lot of these stories and a lot of these essays came from this. I think we had upwardly of around 5,000 or 6,000 students who wanted this scholarship. And, we could really only afford 1 student to come. And it broke my heart. So when I realized that, there are so many students out there that just don't get this opportunity, I decided, what can I do? What can I do to reach these students or at least give them something? And luckily, we have the internet and it's all over the world now. So I embarked then after going through some of these stories and reading, kind of what they thought they needed in a class. and what they needed in their lives. And I created a class, an online course. It's actually called a MOOC, and I'll describe that in a second. And the difficult thing about this class is that I had to consider multiple English proficiencies, right? So because this was a class that was going to be open to the world, basically. It was a free class too. I didn't want anyone to pay for it. And I also had to consider what they wanted. So again, taking the stories and trying to create a class around what they wanted. So in a second here, I'll talk a little bit more about that class. But first, these are the types of online classes to kind of consider when going forward. And you probably have seen these words, I'm sure, many times in the last month or last couple of weeks. Just similar to like Zoom. None of us really knew what Zoom was, but now it's just part of our lives. So if you're in the sort of teaching world nowadays, these are words that you're probably considering or you've seen. So we have the two big ones here, which is asynchronous and synchronous learning. And MOOC is a type of asynchronous class, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but that basically means massive open online class, which means that there's a lot of students in it. So the one that I created actually ended up having about 5,000 students, and it's actually still currently open. I did have to move it over to a new platform, so there aren't as many in there, but there's still new students in that class every day. So the difference, asynchronous online learning really, so if you have a 10-week term, this is more along the lines where a teacher really is a facilitator. There are weekly lessons, there are weekly tasks, but students are kind of working through these on their own. They don't necessarily have a classroom that they're reporting to every single day. That said, there may be a time where the teacher says, okay, we're all gonna meet at this time, and I'm gonna give you a quick lesson, but generally, the lessons are pre-recorded, and there might be discussions, but students may have they're supposed to discuss 2 or 3 times a week. There's no particular time that they need to discuss. So that's one type of class, online course. Synchronous learning really is, you have a scheduled time. So, you're just like a regular class on campus or at your school. You may have a class from 9 to 11 o'clock. Well, that would be the same in synchronous online learning as well. So you would have your class sort of sign into Zoom like you are doing now. And, you would have your class. Your teacher would, be teaching during that time. And then the next day you might have your next scheduled class as well. So there's the big difference between synchronous and asynchronous learning. So let's go into my MOOC class here a little bit more. And I'll explain to you what I did with this class. This is a little more complicated, again, like I mentioned, than most other online classes that you'll probably be creating or that you've been in. Because again, like I said, I had to consider multiple proficiency levels. So I considered basically a kind of a low intermediate to a high advanced to be able to take this class. Beginners, they're more than welcome to take it. But again, with the language and so forth, they would struggle a little bit, but they totally could. So again, why I chose this medium, like I mentioned earlier, it's a way to offer a free class to a large audience. Actually, let me go back here, sorry. If you see the title there, it says, welcome to your adventure story from home to a US university. So when I heard about these students wanting to come to the US, I thought, okay, what could I offer them? So I went and visited all the different departments on campus, from admission to financial aid, to health and counseling center. And I just asked questions with all these different experts within my own university campus and asked them to partake in this class. So this is a class that's basically takes the student through a journey from leaving their computer in front of their home and then arriving in the US. So it is a virtual journey, of course, but that virtual journey could be a reality. So there are 2 parts to this class. And I have a small video that you'll watch here in a second that you'll be able to get a little bit more from the class. So there was this sort of storytelling piece that I added into it. Now, storytelling, as you know, whether it's in-person classrooms or online classes, is such a powerful tool in learning. If you can get students to really talk about their experiences and their stories, there's no stopping their learning at that point. And and they'll just really enjoy the class. So I know a lot of times with online learning, we get tired staring at a screen, but like anything, if you can find that spark, that experience within us, you know, you want to learn more about whatever content you're looking at. So in this class, there was this storytelling model that kind of we used, that would be used in an essay that then would result in a college application essay. So at the end of this course, you hopefully would create that essay that then you could submit to a college or a financial aid office, or maybe you could get a scholarship. The other piece of it, of course, was the study abroad piece. So we put things in there sort of about what's it like to come to the US, how do you maneuver through the visa process, you know, what to consider once you get here, what are the differences between academics, or what academics look like here in the US, for example, and what's expected of students. So I'm going to show you this quick video because it explains a little bit better here. I have to share my other screen. One second, sorry. Oh, sorry. Talk amongst yourselves.
No, don't worry, just no problem. So Tim, there it goes.
I got it.
Yeah, it goes.
Actually, I forgot to share my computer sound.
Tim, you were talking about the program, and you said that you guys had a scholarship. I mean, one just for one person. I mean, but now is this scholarship also for going online, or just for people to attend the campus whenever this crisis about traveling ends?
Yeah, so this was offered before the crisis and everything. So we do offer more smaller little scholarships. This one actually was a full ride one, so it paid for everything except for, you know, I think it was airfare. We didn't pay for that, but, you know, housing,
tuition.
Yeah. But we have offered smaller ones where, you know, we just pay for tuition. The student can just, you know, arrive, like tuition and books. And then we've offered little ones like just we pay for books and things like that as well. But yeah, so another frustrating thing with the pandemic and everything, as you know, many institutions are having to save money. So yeah, we've had to unfortunately put these on hold indefinitely, and hopefully we'll be able to bring them back. I mean, but yeah.
Yeah, that was a question on the chat box.
Oh. Yeah. Thank you. So I'll show you this quick video. It's only about 3 minutes, and it kind of explains the class a little bit more.
Hello, welcome to the course, Your Adventure Story from Home to a U.S. University. My name is Tim Robinson. I'm the Associate Director of the English Language Center at the University of Denver, and one of your instructors for this course. I'm so excited to join you on this study abroad journey. Let's start with an overview of the course. This online course is a self-paced 1-month class. The course comprises of 4 modules, 1 module a week. All the modules are organized sequentially, which means you will need to complete module 1 before you start module 2. Upon completion of each course, you will be awarded a badge. Module 1, the Explorer badge, Module 2, the Voyager badge, Module 3, the Adventurer badge, and Module 4, the Daredevil badge. Also, once you have completed the full course, you will be awarded a certificate of completion. But of course, the true reward will come from all the new knowledge you will gain from the course. Now let's talk about the course. There are 2 parts to this course: the thematic part, study abroad strategies, and the practical part, English academic writing and storytelling. Within each module, you will find instructional videos, readings, discussions, assignments, and quizzes. Module 1, First Steps, will focus on first steps in the study abroad journey. This includes best practices on how to get started, as well as research on the different programs and financial opportunities available. The writing will introduce you to academic writing structure and the power of how your personal stories can help your study abroad goals. Module 2, Preparation, This module will help you better understand the steps to take in the U.S. university application process, which also includes visa procedures. The writing part will continue with academic strategies to improve your writing, but also introduce you to how to use your personal stories for college admission. Module 3, Planning. This module, you will better understand what may be needed before you leave your home countries, such as housing, U.S. college expectations, and standardized tests. For the writing part, you will continue with your personal stories and learn new strategies of incorporating your stories. Finally, Module 4, Destination, we will illustrate the cultural and academic challenges international students may have to confront. For the writing part, you will create a final draft of your stories that you will be able to use as a personal statement to help admissions. Understand why they should pick you to study in their programs. Now, studying abroad can appear to be a difficult journey, but with dedication and perseverance, you can make that dream a reality. The more time you spend on this course and are engaged in discussions, the more you will gain. This class will create a world community of learners sharing the desire to pursue an education that will help you grow and bring the world closer together. Welcome and enjoy the class.
All right. All right, so let me go back to my presentation here. Okay. So that video that I told, a couple of reasons I wanted to show you that video. One, it talks about the course, but also that video itself. So, when you're going online, there's so many different tools that you can use. Fortunately, at our university, we actually have a studio. So a lot of what we did was able to be recorded in that studio. But you don't need a studio, especially with, with the technology of cell phones and, the ready availability of recording is right there. So again, authentic sort of videos are very important, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But it also can be, quite time consuming as well, especially if you haven't done a lot of that sort of create videos on your own and then edit them afterwards. It's something that I had never done before this class, but I actually kind of learned. I learned how to use Adobe Premiere, for example, and this was all on my own. So it almost kind of brought something new to my career that, after being in this career for, 18 years at that point, it was nice to be like, wow, there's new things that you can learn and new things you can do as an instructor to keep it fun and interesting as well. So here we did use a creation studio, and then we had interviews of many different people. You can see a picture there of Crystal, who's actually in our study abroad office, interviewing 2 international students. So we had the Office of International Admissions, the Financial Aid, we had our teachers, for example, health and counseling people, nurses, for example, and then former international students, and then there were others as well. So that's kind of what kind of getting more people involved is also great when considering to make an online class. So now let's kind of get into the weeds here a little bit of online learning. So I'm going to start with asynchronous instruction. So the pros and cons for students, for teachers, for really designers as well. So the pros here are students can complete tasks on a structured yet flexible schedule that works for them. So that's kind of why we had to go asynchronous in that MOOC example, because people are coming from different time zones. Now, if the majority of your students will be, within your country or your culture or your time zone, maybe asynchronous is not really needed in that case. But however, if you are planning to go, throughout the world to different time zones, synchronous learning can be much more complicated. So this is a real pro for that. Students have more time to consider their responses to prompts and process cultural and linguistic nuance. So, when you're in a class, as you know, many of your students may be quiet because maybe depending on their learning styles, it takes them some time to process. And in a second language, I think we're even at a larger disadvantage as online teachers, because not only are we teaching language, we're teaching content, and then we're teaching, to students who have different language proficiencies. And then there's the different learning styles, right? So some of them may take a little more time. So this is a pro for asynchronous learning where, you know, they can take time to think before they write in a discussion, for example. More developing is needed up front, but once a course is created, less time is needed to teach the course. Now this could be on the con side, really depending on how you look at it. Yeah, asynchronous courses do require a lot of time up front. So, you know, it's, you know, if you've ever flipped a classroom, if you've ever done that, you know, it requires a lot of video, requires a lot of things done before you get started. However, the great thing about asynchronous classes is that once the course is actually created, you know, that when that teacher comes in as a facilitator, it's not as difficult for them. And you'll find that it's a little easier to kind of hand these courses off to teachers that even haven't taught them before. Maybe you could just, you know, go over it with them briefly before they teach it, because everything's already pretty planned out already. Another one, a well-prepared course can easily be taught by multiple instructors without much training. So I kind of talked about that, but also, you know, you can have co-teaching models here where, you know, you have two teachers working through this course together, making sure that they answer questions that the students propose. And it actually helps make the course a little bit stronger when you have two teachers, especially if you, in a MOOC class, when you have, you know, 5,000 students possibly, you definitely need more people to help out with that. So let's look at some of the cons here. Students may need more time to read or listen to assigned material, read and respond to prompts, or discussion posts. So again, you know, I know on the other side, I talked about one of the pros is that they have more time. Well, sometimes in asynchronous classes, unfortunately, you know, they may only have 1 week or 2 days to write something and turn it in. And then you have to move on to the next topic the next week. You can't really stay around, you know, that one particular topic for a little extra time. You have to kind of follow that schedule and keep moving. So that could be a con as well for some students. Next, students may submit shorter or less complex writing assignments. This is very true, and this is very true for MOOCs, where, you know, students may just go through the course just to get the information and then leave and not really do anything, which is fine. If that's what they want to do, that's fine. But in an asynchronous course where possibly you do have assessments and grades, and you want to be able to see the progress of your students, this could be an issue. So yeah, students may feel like, well, I don't have much contact with this teacher, so I'm just going to write a little bit. You know, I'm not going to try as hard, because they're not, you know, you don't have the teacher sort of looking at them like you do in a classroom, right? Getting on them for not doing their work. So in an asynchronous class, really students need that motivation to learn already before they get there. Yeah, so again, without live interaction, students may have fewer opportunities to ask clarifying questions. So, you know, if they're stuck on something, they can't just say, hey, teacher, I need help with this. Again, I'll talk about what you can do to get around this. But yeah, that's definitely a con where, you know, a student might be at home working on something and they just don't have anyone to talk to or maybe they're making the same mistake again and again and they don't realize it. Students may feel less motivated to learn with less interaction from classmates and teachers. Again, this is probably also an argument you'll see just from being in quarantine. I think we are a social animal, and which means we like to be around other people. It's harder online, and it's even harder on asynchronous classes. Yes, you have some back and forth in discussions and so forth, but it's not instant. You know, that's why a lot of us love texting and we hate email, because, you know, we just want that instant gratification. But in asynchronous classes, unfortunately, you would have to wait to get answers to your questions and your comments in discussions. So yeah, it requires a lot of upfront preparation. So as you can see, I did put that on the other side there. These classes really need to be planned out. They need to be structured in a way that are very clear for students, similar to that MOOC I did. You'll notice within that class, it follows a similar structure. Depending on what type of platform you're using. For example, we use Canvas, some people use Blackboard. I think there's Moodle, there's a lot of different platforms out there. But having consistency in that platform is very important. If things look chaotic in there, you're gonna lose students very quickly.
Is Canvas friendlier now, Tim?
Yeah, sorry.
Is Canvas friendlier now? My experience with Canvas was not the best.
No, well,
No.
yeah, yeah. All these sort of online learning systems, yeah, they definitely have. I'm not getting into those. I mean, I could probably do a whole nother presentation on those, and I'd be happy to. We can talk about that.
Yeah, it was a very
Yeah.
hard for me, but then it went nice the course. We have a question not on the chat box. It was on a private because the person could not made it on the chat box. He sent a
Okay.
message to our WhatsApp. He said, you were talking about motivation,
Mhm.
um, and talking about how the students deliver their assignments.
Mhm.
So what kind of activities can then motivate a student in order to complete an assignment the best way they can?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, sparking that sort of interest in learning, I think whether it's English language learning or history or math, I mean, we've all been there, very few times I'm sure, you get a student who comes into class and is just, front and center, like, I need to learn this, and they're really go-getters. The majority of us, tend to be a little more passive and, struggle with sort of motivation factor around learning. They say there are these sort of two learning parts of our brain, the automatic and the one that requires a little more thinking. So think of it as riding a bike, like once you learn how to ride a bike, you're not still in your brain thinking, oh, I have to move the pedals and I have to do this. No, it's kind of automatic. So you tend to enjoy it. But, all of a sudden when you have to swerve, so that you don't get hit by a car, for example, you have to turn on that other part of your brain. And what happens with language learning is that you have that other part, that part that requires all that energy on all the time. You're having to concentrate, and it's exhausting, and it's and you lose your motivation and your interest that way. So
Totally.
how do you do it? So again, the one example I showed you again is, you have to kind of figure out, why are your students studying English? What are the reasons behind that? And use that as a motivational factor. So whether it's in your activities or what you're doing. So I get it. Sometimes grammar is grammar. There's not much we can do about that. But the way you introduce the grammar in context.
Totally.
And then another suggestion would be, and I think I have this in a later slide, but to kind of have sort of a variety of types of activities. So, you may have a video activity, you may have a writing activity, but that variety also is very important. I think if you're just sort of like doing a lecture, a video lecture, and then you're saying, okay, read this material and then write me a response. If you do that for the only assignment in every week, yeah, you're probably going to lose interest from your students. But if you
Totally.
more of a variety of activities. And there's so much out there, and having the internet available, it just takes a little time to kind of be a little creative on what you're going to do. So I'm trying to think. So one example, so in that MOOC class, for example, we decided to use stories because we feel the stories of some of these students would help them for university admission. So, when you're talking about yourself and you're sort of reflecting on yourself and the things that you've experienced, it makes you sort of feel like, hey, this is who I am, and I am enjoying this, and I want more. So that's one way of
Yeah, totally, definitely.
but it's hard. That's a
So
hard question. And that could be a whole another webinar.
webinar, yes. I guess, but I guess what we can, take out of all what you've been saying, which is amazing. It's like the course needs a purpose, but the purpose we're going to give the students is taken from themselves. Getting this information from them, why are they studying this, what they need it for, what is the real motivation, and based on that, then we're supposed to consider the different activities we're supposed to be working with during the whole course.
Right.
Yeah, because the student wants to study, because if not, he does not enroll. If it is an adult, that's what we're saying, but still, even when he feels the motivation to study or to do something in course or a program, the student lacks some time of the purpose. Because he doesn't really know. So the teacher needs to help in this discovery for making them, have a pleasant program or running a program the better way they can.
Exactly. I love how you said purpose. I think that's so important. You'll find, you see it here too with students in the sort of K through 12 system where they have to learn a language. They have to learn something. It's not that they really choose to or they want to. right? They have to. You don't see, there's not really that purpose around it. So, you know, in the United States, you know, people aren't great about, you know, having a second language because they don't have that purpose. Whereas if you look at some countries where, you know, like Africa, where a lot of Africans could speak, you know, 5 or 6 different languages because they're having to communicate and use those languages. They see the purpose in it. So, you know, also when you see adults, you know, learning at a university or in a language school, for example, they're there because they have a purpose. They're not just there because maybe necessarily they love the language. They're there because maybe it's for work or something. So it's finding that purpose and you know, and really making that front and center when creating activities and tasks.
Totally. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So synchronous learning. So the pros for this, again, synchronous classes offer more potential opportunities for intercultural learning and exchange. The real theme around synchronous learning, the pro around it is really that, you know, it's really like students are together at the same time. So they have more time to talk with each other. You know, some of our students, for example, after class is finished, because we do our current curriculum is synchronous. Some of them actually ask the teacher if the teacher could not, if the teacher could leave the Zoom meeting on, for example, so they can hang out and talk afterwards. You know, that's great. That's awesome. I think that's a real advantage of synchronous learning. More opportunities for social interaction with peers. It's not the best social interaction, you know, doing it online, but it is interaction. And that's not really what you get in asynchronous learning. Synchronous courses create more opportunities for students to build connections and comfort with instructors. So you're seeing a theme here of synchronous learning. Really, that interaction piece is really where all the cons are, or the pros, sorry. They are less work up front. So for example, we did move our curriculum totally online, took it in 2 weeks. You know, our university said, okay, we're shutting down in-person classes, everyone's going online. So like, I know a lot of you might have had that experience as well. So we took up that synchronous method because really you can take, you know, your in-person class and it's much easier just to move it over. You don't have to create as many sort of videos, for example, because you're going to be live or in person during your classes. It still requires preparation, of course, don't get me wrong. They're more familiar to seasoned instructors. So again, it feels more like a regular class. So some of you who have been teaching for, you know, 20, 30 years, who've maybe never taught online, for example, it's a little more familiar to do a synchronous form of learning than an asynchronous form. I have to move over my Zoom window here. The cons. So again, if you're hoping that students will be throughout the world tuning into your classes, time zone differences will be difficult. You know, we did have students in our synchronous classes that were studying from China and Saudi Arabia, you know, and of course that means their classes were from, you know, 9 at night to 3 in the morning. So that's they have to change their whole sleeping patterns.
Totally. There's a question, Tim, sorry, here. It was something similar that we had before. I mean, talking about the scholarship, I mean, you said that process has stopped because of the crisis, right? But are there any kind of scholarships for the MOOC courses that you mentioned? And if there is the chance for that, how can a student apply?
Yeah, so, I mean, again, for us at the moment, we're not offering anything. We will be offering online classes. So there are, again, classes you can pay for and still be, you know, wherever you are. It's definitely not as expensive than if you actually came to the US, of course. But I do understand, you know, it's still a very intensive program that we have. So you're looking at, you know, 20 hours of study a week. So one thing about scholarships, you know, you got to do a little bit of research on it. I said this to students actually who are looking to go to the university in the US as well, or around the world. I shouldn't say the US. It could be Australia, New Zealand. You know, there's actually a lot of scholarship and free money out there that gets unused. And you know, the reason for that really is because people don't want to take the time to really look into it. It just takes a lot of time. And, you know, it could take you 2 or 3 days of internet searches, maybe 2 or 3 days of writing small essays and things like that to try to get these. But I can only imagine that you'll start seeing more and more of these types of scholarships at other institutions going forward. Maybe not right now during the pandemic, because I mean, it's a lot of institutions are having to kind of tighten their belts financially. But, you know, there's still many scholarships out there that, you know, don't necessarily come from institutions. They come from private entities and private organizations. And they're, you know, there's even some that may focus specifically to Latin America also. You know, US college campuses are really wanting more international students, whether it's online or in person. They are hungry. The world has become a real large competition for them. Whereas for the longest time, the US institutions were kind of on their own. Like most international students would come to us. You know, we didn't have to really recruit. Now you have Canada, you have Australia, you even have some European countries like France who are offering classes in English. So there's a lot more competition. So US institutions are hungry for students. So there definitely are more opportunities. And I'd be happy to help and talk with a lot of you more about this if you want to email me at another time. So continuing on, students operating outside the native language or outside their home educational context may need more time to think and prepare responses for real-time interactions. So again, if everyone's, you know, if everyone in your class is a Spanish speaker, for example, in their first language, maybe this is not necessarily the case. But if you have people coming maybe who speak Portuguese or from different languages, you know, Chinese, for example, they may need a little more time during class to kind of think through things, for example, which they won't get in synchronous learning. Students, did I repeat myself there? Oh, students operating outside their native language can find it hard to follow live discussions. That's true. It's, again, if most of us are still used to in-person classes, learning online is a skill that you have to learn, and it may not come in the first class. Nonverbal cues, this is the big one. So, you know, I forgot, I've seen so many percentages out there. They say like 75% of communication is nonverbal. I've heard 90% is nonverbal, but, you know, the majority of communication is nonverbal. So, you know, just as I'm talking to you now, you can see just the way my face is moving and so forth, but you don't see my hands, you don't see other parts of my body, you're not able to pick up on those cues. And that's a real disadvantage during synchronous learning or just online learning in general.
Tim, there is another question on the chat box. It says, okay, how do students interact if there are difficulties to have real-time lessons? I mean, how do you get them to interact? I mean, if they're in different time zones? And how do you make students work in teams if they are not in the same country? Yeah, so, you know, to answer the first question, so that's difficult. So, you know, if they are in different time zones, really I like to actually mention that there is a hybrid model that you can consider, sort of synchronous / asynchronous. I don't want to think that like it's one or the other kind of thing. And actually at our university, they're starting to really push for this type of model. Especially if you do have students from multiple time zones, for example. So interaction, you know, it really, again, it's similar to a classroom. It's really up to the teacher to really motivate and push these students to interact more. I've been in online classes as a student where some of the discussions, the weekly discussions, for example, were intense. And the one great thing about it, you know, is you're able to kind of read and research your answer before you do it. So you can have a really strong answer. You know, this is the one thing I think in-person classes actually lack. You know, when you have discussions in a classroom, you know, people are just thinking from their head or from what they read, you know, a couple of days beforehand, which they might have forgot, but they're not really using the research around their answers. Whereas an online discussion, you can have the book in front of you and you can really delve into a deep discussion online. But again, it really requires the students to push themselves to do that. So in a lot of these online platforms, you know, they all have sort of similar types of tools. And, you know, so for example, the online discussion, it doesn't have to always be typing. You know, an online discussion could actually, you know, some of these platforms like Canvas, for example, allows you to record your answers, whether it's video or not, and then share them. So kind of like, you know, WhatsApp, you know, so people use that to record as they're talking, right? So you can do the kind of the same thing.
And then I also mentioned asynchronous learning, sometimes leaving the video on for students just to talk. So not necessarily, have an activity for them, but, give them opportunity just to use the language. Of course, you'd hope that they would use the language that they're studying in, and if they're all, from the same first language, they may not, but you would, but they may, again, if they're motivated to do so. The interaction is hard, I mean, it's something that, again, teachers kind of have to just say over and over. And we see it in person in classes too, when we put them in groups, for example, to discuss something. Some of them will do it and some of them won't. And you have to think, like, again, why are they doing that? And it goes back to that idea of purpose. So are they having this discussion just to fulfill the task and the activity, or are they doing it to practice a particular grammar point or particular skill that they're going to use for something else? So that's in a nutshell, kind of what I think the best way to interact is. And I'm open to suggestions for a lot of you too, because again, there might be something that was useful or you thought was successful.
Right. Thank you.
So how do we kind of overcome some of these challenges? And then we'll kind of wrap up after this. I'm almost out of time here. So when developing tasks and activities, again, we talked about this quite a bit. Sparking interest, so telling stories, connect to students' reasons for taking English. And this is not just for online learning, in my opinion. This really is just for learning in general. That sort of needs assessment. What's going on with you? Why are you in this class? And if you're in this class because let's say, someone forced you to be here, whether it's a job or your parents, etc., there's probably still something you could find that might spark their interest. So I briefly talked about this, adopting mixed methods of instruction to support students. Try to mix it up in class. Again, learning intelligences, we all have different ones, or maybe we all have, the same, but we definitely have different times, a different amount of time that we need to learn, etc. So having different methods. So for example, not just having a lecture, but I just thought, sorry, I think I didn't answer one part of the last question that just came to me, was grouping students.
Yeah, though the guy said, thank you very much. Your answer was, satisfactory because he said thanks in the chat box.
Okay. But this made me think of grouping students. So again, in the platform, the online platform we use, and also with Zoom, it's been very successful. You can group students, you can put them in groups, and then the teacher can kind of skip around and listen to the students as they're grouped. So in Canvas, for example, there's something also called, student teams in Canvas as well, where you're able to set up certain tasks and videos where students can watch in groups and then answer. And then as a teacher, you can kind of facilitate and pop in and out of these groups as you're teaching. Again, that's in the synchronous model where you would have class in real time. Using discussion, writing assignments to support prior knowledge, to interact. Again, a combination of just trying to cater to all the skills. I'm definitely a firm believer in, not necessarily separating all the skills. I know it's very common for us to have reading and writing class, listening and speaking class, but really at the end of the day, they're all integrated skills classes. And I think trying to use the whole range of skills within a class is even if it's a writing class, have online discussions and things like that with speaking as well. Amp up collaboration as best you can. I know, we mentioned this, use it, whether it's encouraging students to meet on Zoom on their own and have meetings, or, separating them into groups within the synchronous class, or maybe having them do a project together. All this kind of leads to collaboration. I forgot to mention projects, but projects are great. Project-based learning is awesome. And again, that gives purpose to learners as well. If they're working with someone else on a project, they'll have to interact and collaborate. Support the language processing. So just understand that, being online, it takes a little bit longer to process things. Some students may be better at it than others. I know the younger generations, they call them the net generation. But despite that, they still would probably prefer to play video games, not necessarily 'cause you're kind of churning. So for a lot of the younger generations, doing stuff on computers has now become sort of like entertainment. So now you're having them you're taking that tool for entertainment and saying, hey, now we're using this for work. Now we're using it for learning. So there's going to be a bit of resistance there for that. So trying to, again, make it not entertaining, and I hate using that word because education is not a play, but again, sparking that interest and making it interesting for them. Structure, this is a really big one for online classes, and I can't, express this enough. You need to really consider the structure of your classes, especially when you're the platform that you're using. Consistency is key. Like if you go to the my institution's website, you can find that online MOOC that I talked about, and you can just go through. You don't even have to take it as a student. You can just go through and look at it, but you'll notice the consistency in it. You'll see like every module, every piece of it is very similar. So students can get very lost if it's kind of chaotic on the platform that you're using. And then use a variety of online mediums. So a variety of tasks, activities, utilize video, online discussions, in-person interaction, one-on-one, just everything you can possibly think of, utilize. And then provide a free space that doesn't require a grade. This is very key. So you might have a place where students can discuss other things, whether it's, maybe it's a place for where they can ask questions from the instructor, like they're confused about things or they need help with things, or it's just a space where they just share their experiences about being in quarantine, for example. This is just a great place for them to use more authentic language as best they can. A lot of times in online learning, some of the tasks and activities can be very structured. And I think it's important to have a space or a place within your class that a little more free, where it's a little more free, not so tied to an assessment, for example. Almost done here. So important to consider the differences between online and face-to-face. It's not just a simple transition. Even though you've been teaching for 20 years, you can't just say, oh, I'm just gonna go online and teach. You really need to sort of visualize it because it is different. Teaching online, and once you do it, once you get into it and you do it, it'll come to you. You're a teacher. You're a great teacher, I'm sure, and you'll learn how to do it. Just don't focus on the no's and and the sort of negative thoughts. Just say you can do it. One person a professor told me once that there are people out there that know a lot, but everyone has doubts. Everyone doubts themselves. Even though, I've been teaching for 20 years, I still sometimes get butterflies if I go into a classroom. I don't necessarily think I know what I'm doing all the time. And it's important to kind of have that vulnerability when teaching, to understand that you might make mistakes as you're doing this. Make the most of the online resources. So in our institution, we have almost completely eliminated textbooks. We have found that it's with the internet, there's no point. It takes a little more time to adapt your activities, but why give all the money to publishers? Sorry if there's a publisher online here. But we've noticed that, a lot of the books just, we're not going to create our curriculum for their books. And that's a lot of times what happens, I think, in a lot of institutions. No, we're going to make our classes the way we feel they should, what we feel they should be and what our learners need. We still use some publisher materials, but very little. Just with the internet, there's a lot of open-ended resources out there that are free.
Right. Tim, there is a question for you here in the chat box from a girl. It says, synchronous or asynchronous course, which is more successful in your opinion? And do they face the same challenges to be created and work with?
I would say, so that's a hard question to answer. Which ones, it really depends on the person, which one is, I think, is better than the other. I mean, that's a hard question to answer, really. Again, I think it's just your context more than anything else. So for example, in quarantine, all our students are, within a couple miles of us. So it just made more sense to do synchronous because, we were able to get online pretty quickly in that format. We didn't have to do a lot of preparation beforehand in creating videos and things like that. and there was no real time differences. We had a few students overseas, but they had chosen to leave the country and quarantine in their home country. But the majority of them were just a few miles from, from us. So having the synchronous model just made a lot more sense in that. And especially going, having to go online in 2 weeks, it's a lot easier to do that. Now the asynchronous model, you'll tend to see a little bit probably more in content related courses, like at a university, for example. Especially even before all this had happened, I had taken online courses where, you have like a 10-week course, and every week you have some new material. And at that point, it wasn't language learning. We were learning, let's say, communication or different content related courses. And they were successful. They were great. And again, but it was me too. I think at the end of the day, if someone really wants to learn something, they learn it. Again, as teachers, we're just facilitating, we're just showing them the right direction. The students really have to take that leap. There's only so much we can do. I know we talk about motivation and interest and all that, but really if a student doesn't want to learn, they don't want to learn. And, at that point, it's time to just move on. So they're both can be very successful. And it really depends on your context. And I wish I could give you a better answer than that, because I don't want to say one is better than the other necessarily. Actually, to be honest with you, I would say probably a mix of both. Some students may not want to be online every day for 2 hours in a class. So maybe mix it up. Maybe they're online, for an hour or a couple hours a week, and then the rest of the class is asynchronous. So having kind of a mix between the two is probably the more ideal solution. Because with meetings and, with students and everything every day, I'm exhausted staring at a screen all day.
Yeah.
So if you want to mix it up, that's my opinion, probably the best way to go.
Right.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Again, clear instructions. A lot of times in class, when we give instructions, if a student doesn't understand, they can call you over. It's a lot easier to get them to understand. However, when you're asynchronous, especially, it's really hard for that. So it's important that everything is lined out. Just like I said, the structure of the class, also, it's very important that all the instructions. So for example, if you have an activity or a task, the instructions have to be really, really clear. And if a student still doesn't understand, again, having a space within your online class where students can ask clarifying questions is very key as well. And then we talked a little bit, research your online platform. There's more than that. I don't know what's used in your country. So they all have advantages and disadvantages. We use Canvas here. A lot of people use Blackboard as well. Moodle is very common for MOOCs and things like that. There are different platforms. But before you decide on one, really just do your research on it a little bit. And then finally, I know this takes money, but consider an instructional designer. This is a profession where these people know what they're doing when they create online classes or in-person classes. But I think the new normal for instructional designers now is our online classes. Again, you can do all this on your own. We're doing that. We're not using an instructional designer. However, at the university, we do have them and we have consulted with them. So maybe you don't have to necessarily use one to create your whole course. However, asking clarifying questions or to take a look at things helps. So I just for time, I don't really need to go too much into these questions here. So I just have a couple final thoughts, and then I'll answer any other questions you may have. So I have just a couple of quotes here. I always like ending on some quotes. So we need to bring learning to people instead of people to learning. So this is the new mode of learning, and we've used classroom for 1,000 years. A classroom probably 200 years ago, if I took a picture of it and then took a picture of a classroom today, you probably wouldn't see much of a difference. Maybe instead of a blackboard, there's a whiteboard. I don't know. E-learning shouldn't be a casual joyride on a Sunday afternoon with the cruise control engaged. The sole purpose of e-learning is to teach. So just remember that. So students might consider this, this is going to be easy. This is going to be, I'm going to be on cruise control. I'm going to get through this very quickly. But that's not the case. you'll find that online learning actually takes a lot more time for a student, and even asynchronous. They're actually probably more engaged in the class than they would be if they were there in person. So thank you very much. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Tim, for all the information given, and that's such a great, webinar. It was very complete. I know there's a lot more of information you can share with us, but don't worry, there will be a second part for this webinar, I promise. And yeah, there is another question they sent us privately to our WhatsApp. It says how to deal with resources problems, and the person is mentioning, is there a minimum requirement for having resources to take an online course for students, or for example, in the case of the institution, to provide those resources for teachers for being able to teach in an online course, whether it is synchronous or asynchronous? What should be the considerations on this matter about the resources the person is asking?
Of course, I think for one part of that question, when you talk about sort of what the institution requires, I think that really depends on where you're at and what they require of every instructor, for example, in the resources or the department. When really thinking about the resources, it's more along the lines like taking a look at your learning outcomes, right, first. So, whatever the learning outcomes of the course are, those are your rules that you're following by. That's really what the students need to leave your class with. And then the resources are just, ways of getting the students to meet those goals, those learning outcomes. So if that takes, a lot of different resources, or if it just takes a little bit, that's going to kind of come up, that's going to be, for the teacher to consider. Maybe if it's like a higher level, sort of C1, sort of a transitional English class to the university, there might be a lot less in terms of, sort of structured, simple grammar pages and things like that. There might just be more sort of longer essays and discussions, for example. You may not need as many resources. Whereas, if you're teaching more of a foundational level, yeah, you probably will need to have more sort of, I guess, structured tasks and activities. And in terms of, again, finding these resources online, it takes a little time to kind of research some of these and kind of look. I know we tend to type something in the Google and we look at the first two things, but it actually requires to kind of go further into it. And I'd be happy to share a lot of what we have gathered. We have, in our institution, we actually put together a page of online resources for our instructors. And for department heads, that's part of the job too, really just lending a hand to your instructors and helping them out with a lot of the stuff, maybe doing a lot of the research for them, because it's a lot of extra work to not just teach online, but to plan and prep it as well. So I hope I answered your question. That's as best I could.
No, don't worry. Yes, that's good. There is another question here. It says, how to deal with problems. For example, not all the students have, for example, in Latin America, that's something we're facing here. Most of our students are from low income. So they may not have a computer, or if they have a tablet, or if they have a computer, the camera doesn't work, or some of them can just log in on a cell phone, smartphone, which is the only thing they have. If you have faced such problems or similar things, how do you guys deal with this when this happens? I guess this is what the question of this participant is.
Yeah, and that's a great question. Sort of access is a big problem throughout the world. And again, for us, for example, at the university, it's actually required. They call it a laptop university, so it's required that all students have it. So we don't necessarily have those particular problems. We do run into, whether it's the internet connections are slow, or, you're right, maybe the student lost their camera briefly. But when you're talking about, parts of the population that just don't even have computers, that's that's difficult to maneuver. But like you mentioned, if they have a phone, it's reaching out to students and understanding where they're coming from, where that context is. And if they do have a phone, most platforms nowadays, so the one we use, Canvas, does have a mobile app, that students can use. Again, it's difficult, I think, if you have students who are using computers and a mobile phone, for example, because then you got to kind of consider, how is this activity going to work for both? So if all the students, for example, had a mobile, then you can think, okay, this is how I'm going to teach this class. They only have this tool. So this is so the tasks and the activities that I'm going to create around this tool, I have to consider that they're using the phone. So things like writing activities, that's tough. You can't really necessarily write essays on phones. Maybe you can, but it's hard. But there's things you can do, like maybe have students write it out. For example, write their essays on paper and then take pictures, and then send them in. Online discussions, for example, still can be done on the phone fairly easily. Not with me. I'm a little older now, so I don't have that thumb technique that a lot of people have nowadays. But again, I think just really getting to know your students. And you're right, internet access, that's the one big disadvantage of online learning. If they don't have internet and they don't have computers, it's not going to work. It's just not. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you very much, Tim, for this answer. It is, a reality we live,
Yeah.
in Latin America. Most of our students don't have the resources. It's, for example, if you have 20 students in a classroom, then, I don't know, like 8, they do have a laptop or at least a computer desk, but it's not like the regular basis here. Most of them, they could have a phone, which is the way they used to connect and stay in touch with teachers and classmates. But and at least here, it's very difficult. And of course, because of the context, the university does not demand the student, hey, you need to have a computer. Now that we are in this situation, they cannot demand it, because it's like, so it's been it's in general, it is a challenge, as you have described, all things, the planning that we have to go through. To set up an online course, whether it is synchronous or asynchronous, then you have to, add up all these challenges. Talking about the social context and stuff that
Right.
the student deals with, and even the teacher deals with.
Yeah.
Because if the student is having an issue in order to access all the information and the lessons and the classes, that is the teacher's issue as well, because he needs to teach.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's that is a whole other context that I understand where you're coming from, and I know that's really hard, and but there might be an opportunity there. I think for a lot of you that may be in this context, really trying to figure out, how do you tackle that, and maybe you come up with something that can benefit everyone else that are experiencing that same problem. So again, trying to find that sort of that light at the end of the tunnel, something that sort of optimism really goes a long way. Because again, like you mentioned, it's social, maybe it's even political to some extent, if they're telling us all to go online, but yet, people don't have access or don't have money to purchase things.
Totally.
It's not necessarily the student's fault at all, right?
It is true, but well, it's something we've been trying to deal with, at least here in this part of the world. Somehow we have managed to work it out, and we're still looking for different ways in order to have our students keep learning and having their lessons full and trying to participate, making it interactive. It's quite of a challenge, but that's what we've been doing. So, Tim, it was a very enlightening webinar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very
we just
much.
went out of time, but we didn't care about it. Really,
Oh, okay.
we just wanted to keep listening. And I know there's more about online teaching that you can provide according to your own experience and everything. So for sure, we will be scheduling, like a second part of a webinar or something for people to keep listening to your experience and how you have to deal with it. Okay.
Yeah,
So
thanks for having me.
joining.
Good luck, everybody. Stay safe. Again, happy Father's Day. And I have my email up there. So please feel free to reach out anytime.
Yeah, they were asking if I could reach out. I mean, talking about information of scholarship or go deeper on the information you're given. So Tim has provided his email there. And also, I mean, the Language Center has a webpage. And I do think it has a contact area where you can write to the Language Center. So you can access it. Well, when we publish the video on YouTube, the edited version and everything, we're going to put there the link to the Language Center page. Okay.
Perfect. All right.
So, Tim, thank you very much again. And happy Father's Day for you already.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And thanks to the Utterers Corner. You guys are great.
Thank you very much. So we hope to see you soon.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Guys, thank you very much for joining us. Everything on the information about this webinar will be there on our YouTube channel in some hours, maybe, because we have to edit the video. And also the information about the webpage that you need to go to in order to contact the center where Tim works, or just go and check the video for Tim's email. Okay.
Well, the editors, it was a pleasure to have you here. Our next webinar is going to be on August the 16th, right, with Professor Mary Allegra. So we hope to see you there. Bye-bye. I don't know if there's another information you need to share.
Oh, no, you just, keep in touch and checking on our social networks for the webinar that Joel said. It's going to be on August the 16th with Professor Mary Allegra, former Ventislo president, and now she's working in the United States as Spanish professor as well. So, and keep in touch because our upcoming Utah, it's coming soon on July the 4th. So bye-bye for now. Thank you for joining us.